What happens when two of the most outspoken women in media sit down for what was supposed to be a friendly chat, only for it to spiral into one of the most uncomfortable moments in daytime television history? The View was expecting a standard promotional appearance, but what they got was a confrontation that had the entire studio holding its breath. Meghan Markle walked onto the set to thunderous applause. Waving to the audience with that practiced smile we've all seen 1,000 times, Whoopi Goldberg stood up to greet her, extending her hand in welcome. And for a moment, everything seemed perfectly choreographed. But if you looked closely, really closely, you could see something in Whoopi's expression, a tightness around her eyes that suggested this wasn't going to go the way anyone expected. Before we get into what happened next, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us whose side you're on after hearing this whole story, because trust me, you're going to have opinions. The opening pleasantries were standard fare. Joy Behar asked about Meghan's latest ventures, and Meghan delivered her well-rehearsed answers about empowerment and advocacy. The audience clapped at all the right moments. Everything was going exactly as planned, or so it seemed. Then Whoopi, who had been unusually quiet, leaned forward in her chair. "Can I ask you something real?" Whoopi said, her voice cutting through the polite chatter. The other hosts exchanged glances. Meghan's smile didn't falter, but her posture shifted ever so slightly. "Of course," she replied. "I've been doing this a long time," Whoopi continued, "and one thing I've learned is that everybody's got a story. Everybody's been through something. But lately, it feels like we're in this place where some stories get told over and over, and other people's struggles, they just get pushed to the side. Do you ever think about that?" The studio went quiet. This wasn't a scripted question. This was Whoopi going off book, and everyone knew it. Meghan's media training kicked in immediately. "I think everyone's story matters. Whoopi, that's exactly why I've been so vocal about my own experiences. Because if sharing what I've been through helps even one person feel less alone, then it's worth it, right?" "Right," Whoopi nodded slowly. "But see, here's where I get confused. You left the royal family because you wanted privacy. You wanted to protect your family from the media. I get that. I respect that. But then there's interviews, there's documentaries, there's podcasts, there's books. At what point does it stop being about privacy and start being about something else?" The audience gasped. This was not the softball conversation anyone had anticipated. Meghan's jaw tightened, and for a split second, the mask slipped. "I think that's a bit reductive, Whoopi. When you're silenced for so long, when your narrative is controlled by other people, speaking your truth isn't the same as seeking attention. It's about reclaiming your story." "But who silenced you?" Whoopi pressed. "You married into one of the most famous families in the world. You had to know what that meant. You had to know there would be protocols, expectations. Nobody forced you to join that family." Sunny Hostin tried to jump in, clearly attempting to steer the conversation back to safer territory, but Meghan held up her hand. "No, it's fine. I want to address this." She turned to face Whoopi directly, her voice taking on an edge that hadn't been there before. "You're absolutely right, Whoopi. I knew what I was getting into, or at least I thought I did. But knowing something intellectually and actually living through the reality of it are two very different things." "Okay, so walk me through it," Whoopi said, leaning back in her chair with her arms crossed. "What specifically happened that was so terrible you had to leave an entire country?" "It wasn't one thing," Meghan replied, her voice rising slightly. "It was 1,000 little things. It was being told I couldn't go to lunch with my friends without permission. It was having every single thing I wore or said dissected and criticized. It was watching people write horrible things about my son before he was even born." "Welcome to fame," Whoopi shot back. "I'm not trying to be cruel here. I'm really not. But do you know how many famous mothers have had their kids talked about? Do you know how many women in this industry have been torn apart by the press? That's not unique to you." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Meghan's publicist, sitting in the front row, looked like she wanted to crawl under her seat. "I never said it was unique to me," Meghan said, her voice sharp. "But just because other people have suffered doesn't mean my suffering doesn't count. That's not how pain works." "Nobody's saying your pain doesn't count," Whoopi replied, her tone softening just slightly. "But I am saying that sometimes, and I'm speaking from experience here, sometimes we have to ask ourselves if we're helping or if we're just keeping the wound open." "Keeping the wound open," Meghan repeated, and there was genuine anger in her voice now. Is that what you think I'm doing? You think I enjoy talking about the worst period of my life? You think I like reliving the moments when I felt so low I didn't want to be here anymore? The studio fell into complete silence. Even the camera operators seemed frozen. Whoopi's expression softened, but she didn't back down. I don't think you enjoy it, but I do think that at some point you have to decide. Are you going to be defined by what happened to you, or are you going to move forward? I am moving forward, Meghan insisted. Speaking about it is how I move forward. That's my process. And that's fine, Whoopi said, but your process is very public. And when your process is that public, people are going to have opinions about it. You can't control that. I'm not trying to control what people think, Meghan said, frustration clear in her voice. I'm just trying to tell my side of the story. But how many times does your side need to be told? Whoopi asked. The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Meghan stared at Whoopi for a long moment, and you could see her processing the question, deciding how to respond without completely losing her composure on national television. How many times does my side need to be told? She repeated slowly. I don't know, Whoopi. How many times did the tabloids get to tell their version? How many covers? How many headlines? How many think pieces written by people who never met me, never spoke to me, never bothered to ask if any of it was true? But somehow, when I respond, when I try to set the record straight, that's too much. Whoopi nodded, acknowledging the point. Fair enough. The tabloids were brutal. I'm not denying that. But here's what I'm struggling with. You say you want privacy. You say you want to protect your children. But then you're on every platform talking about the very institution you say hurt you. At some point, doesn't that start to feel like you're using your pain as currency? The other hosts looked genuinely uncomfortable now. Sarah N. was fidgeting with her note cards. Alyssa Farah Griffin looked like she was trying to telepathically signal the producers to go to commercial, but Meghan wasn't backing down, and neither was Whoopi. Currency, Meghan said, her voice dangerously quiet. You think I'm profiting off my trauma? I think you've built a brand around it, Whoopi said bluntly. And look, I understand why. You're not the first person to turn their struggles into a platform, and you won't be the last. But let's be honest about what it is. You're making deals with streaming services. You're writing books. You're giving speeches. That's business. And there's nothing wrong with business. But don't dress it up as purely altruistic healing when there are contracts and dollar signs involved. Meghan's face flushed. So what would you have me do, Whoopi? Stay silent. Let people continue to believe lies about me. Let my children grow up seeing all these false narratives about their mother and just accept it. Is that what you would do? I would ask myself what my real goal is, Whoopi replied. If your goal is to change public opinion, I hate to tell you, but you're fighting a losing battle. Some people are never going to like you, no matter what you say or how many times you say it. If your goal is justice or accountability, then I'd ask who exactly you're trying to hold accountable. Because the royal family hasn't responded to any of your claims, and they're not going to. So what are you really after here? I'm after the truth, Meghan said firmly. I'm after people understanding what actually happened instead of the sanitized version or the villain edit that the media created. But whose truth? Whoopi pressed, because truth is subjective sometimes. Your truth is your experience, your perspective. Their truth is their experience, their perspective. And the real truth probably lives somewhere in the middle. In that gray area nobody wants to talk about because it's complicated and messy and doesn't make for good television. Are you seriously both sidsing this right now? Meghan asked, incredulous. You think there's a middle ground between someone telling you they felt suicidal and were denied help, and the institution that denied them that help? Where's the gray area in that? Whoopi took a deep breath. The gray area is in context. The gray area is in understanding that the royal family operates under rules and protocols that have existed for centuries. I'm not saying those rules are right. I'm not saying they shouldn't change. But I am saying that going into that situation and expecting them to rewrite everything for one person, that might have been unrealistic. So I should have just suffered in silence. Meghan shot back. I should have just smiled and waved and pretended everything was fine while I was falling apart inside. Is that what strength looks like to you? Strength looks like a lot of things, Whoopi said. Sometimes strength is speaking up. But sometimes strength is knowing when to step back, when to stop picking at the scab, when to actually let yourself heal instead of performing your healing for an audience, performing Meghan's voice was shaking now, whether from anger or hurt or both. It was hard to tell. You think I'm performing? You think any of this is an act? I think you're a very smart woman who knows how to craft a narrative, Whoopi said, not unkindly, but firmly. I think you understand media better than you let on, and I think every interview you do, every story you tell, you know exactly how it's going to play, exactly what reaction you're going to get. That's not criticism, that's acknowledgement that you're savvy. What I understand, Meghan said, her words clipped and precise, is that women, especially women of color, are constantly told that we're too much, we're too loud, we're too emotional, we're too demanding. And when we advocate for ourselves, when we refuse to accept mistreatment, suddenly we're calculating or manipulative or playing the victim. But when we stay quiet, we're complicit in our own oppression. Now see, that's interesting, Whoopi said, leaning forward again, because you're making this about race and gender, and those are absolutely factors. I'm not denying that. But I've watched a lot of people go through public scandals and family drama, people of all colors and backgrounds, and there's a pattern. At first, everyone's sympathetic. Everyone's on your side. But the more you talk, the more you explain, the more you defend yourself, eventually people start to wonder if maybe there's more to the story. So you're saying I should have given one interview and then disappeared? Meghan asked. Just said my piece and then never addressed it again, even when people continued to attack me. I'm saying there's a difference between defending yourself and living in defense mode, Whoopi replied. Every time you give another interview, every time you bring it up again, you're inviting people back into that conversation. You're giving them permission to have opinions about your life. And then you seem surprised or hurt when those opinions aren't all positive. I have never asked anyone to agree with me, Meghan said, her voice rising. I have simply asked to be heard, to be believed, to be treated with basic human dignity. Why is that so much to ask? It's not too much to ask, Whoopi said, but you're asking it from the public, from strangers, from people who don't know you and never will. The only people whose opinions should really matter are the people in your actual life. But you keep bringing your private pain into the public sphere, and then you're upset when the public treats it like public property. Because it became public whether I wanted it to or not, Meghan countered. The moment I married into that family, my privacy was gone. Everything about me became public. So excuse me for trying to control at least part of that narrative. Control, Whoopi repeated. That's the word that keeps coming up. You want to control the narrative. Control how people see you. Control the story. But life doesn't work that way. You can't control what other people think or say or believe. And the harder you try, the more exhausting it becomes. Meghan looked at Whoopi with something between frustration and desperation. So what's the alternative? Just let people say whatever they want about me. Just accept whatever reputation they want to give me. The alternative is to build a life that's so full and rich and meaningful that what strangers think becomes irrelevant, Whoopi said quietly. Meghan sat back in her chair, and for a moment she looked genuinely thrown by Whoopi's words. The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word of this exchange that had gone so far beyond a typical daytime talk show interview. That's easy for you to say, Meghan finally responded, her voice quieter now but no less intense. You've had decades to build that life. You've had time to establish yourself, to prove yourself, to become untouchable. I didn't get that luxury. I was thrust into the spotlight and immediately torn apart. You're right, I have had decades, Whoopi acknowledged, and you know what I learned in those decades? That the more you feed the beast, the hungrier it gets. Every response, every clarification, every defense just gives people more ammunition. At some point, you have to starve it out. You have to stop giving it oxygen. But they're lying about me, Meghan said, and there was real anguish in her voice now. They're lying about my character, about my intentions, about who I am as a person. How do I just let that stand? You let it stand by living differently, Whoopi replied. You let your actions speak louder than your words. But instead, you're in this constant cycle of explanation and justification, and honestly, it makes you look defensive. It makes people wonder what you're so desperate to prove. I'm desperate to prove that I'm human, Meghan said, her eyes glistening now. That I'm not the monster they made me out to be. That I had real reasons for the choices I made. Is that really so hard to understand? It's not hard to understand at all, Whoopi said, her tone gentler now. But here's the thing, and I say this with love. You're never going to convince everyone. You're never going to win over the people who decided to hate you before they ever met you. So why are you still trying? Why are you giving them so much power over your peace? Because it's not just about me anymore, Meghan said passionately. I have children who are going to grow up and Google my name and see all these horrible things written about their mother. I'm fighting for them, so they know I didn't just roll over and accept it. Whoopi nodded slowly, considering this. I respect that. I do. But have you considered that maybe the best gift you could give your children is showing them that their mother is strong enough not to need the world's approval? That she's confident enough in who she is that she doesn't need to constantly defend herself to strangers? That sounds nice in theory, Meghan said, a bitter edge creeping into her voice. But in practice, silence gets interpreted as guilt. If I don't speak up, people assume everything said about me is true. And when you do speak up, people accuse you of being attention-seeking, Whoopi countered. You can't win this game. That's what I'm trying to tell you. The game is rigged. So stop playing. Stop playing, Meghan repeated. You mean just disappear? Just fade into the background and let them write whatever story they want about me. No, Whoopi said firmly. I mean live your life so loudly and so authentically that the noise becomes irrelevant. Do work that matters. Build relationships that fulfill you. Create things that outlast the news cycle. But this constant back and forth, this endless need to correct the record, it's keeping you stuck in the past. And I don't think that's where you really want to be. Meghan was quiet for a long moment, and you could see her wrestling with Whoopi's words, wanting to reject them, but also recognizing some truth in them. You make it sound so simple, she finally said. It's not simple at all, Whoopi admitted. It's probably the hardest thing you'll ever do. But I've watched a lot of people go through public scrutiny, and the ones who come out the other side intact are the ones who stop measuring their worth by public opinion. They're the ones who find a way to be at peace with their choices, regardless of what anyone else thinks. And what about accountability? Meghan asked. What about the institution that failed me, that failed to protect me? Do they just get away with it? What does accountability look like to you? Whoopi asked. Really think about that. Does it look like an apology? Because you're not going to get one. Does it look like them admitting they were wrong? Because that's not going to happen either. Does it look like the public turning against them? Because the monarchy has survived worse than this, and it's still standing. So, what exactly are you hoping for? Meghan's composure finally cracked. I'm hoping for people to see that I was telling the truth. That I wasn't making it up. That I wasn't exaggerating. That everything I said actually happened. Is that really too much to ask? No, it's not too much to ask, Whoopi said softly. But you have to decide who needs to believe you. Because if you need everyone to believe you, you're going to spend the rest of your life fighting a battle you can't win. But if the people who matter, the people in your inner circle, if they believe you and support you, maybe that has to be enough. It doesn't feel like enough, Meghan said quietly. And for the first time in the entire interview, her carefully constructed facade completely fell away. She looked tired, emotionally exhausted, like someone who had been fighting for so long she'd forgotten what peace felt like. I know it doesn't, Whoopi said, and her voice was full of empathy now. But that feeling, that need for everyone to understand and validate your experience, that's what's keeping you trapped. Because you're giving strangers the power to determine your worth, and that's a power they don't deserve to have. Meghan wiped at her eyes quickly, trying to regain her composure. So you think I should just stop talking about it? Never mention it again. I think you should ask yourself what you're getting out of these conversations, Whoopi said. Are they healing you? Are they moving you forward? Or are they just keeping you anchored to the worst time in your life? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the second one. Maybe some wounds don't heal, Meghan said. Maybe some things stay with you no matter how much time passes. Maybe Whoopi agreed. But there's a difference between carrying a scar and constantly reopening the wound. You get to choose which one you're doing. The studio was so quiet, you could have heard a pin drop. The other hosts seemed afraid to breathe, let alone speak. This had gone so far beyond what anyone had anticipated, and yet neither Meghan nor Whoopi seemed ready to back down. I came here thinking we were going to have a conversation about my work, Meghan said, attempting to lighten the mood, but not quite succeeding. I didn't realize I was signing up for therapy. Sometimes the conversations we need aren't the conversations we planned for, Whoopi said with a slight smile. And look, I'm not trying to attack you. I'm really not. I'm just offering perspective from someone who's been in this industry a long time and has seen how this story usually ends. And how does it end? Meghan asked. That depends on you, Whoopi said. It either ends with you finding peace and moving forward, or it ends with you still having this same conversation 5 years from now, 10 years from now, still trying to convince people who are never going to be convinced anyway. And I don't think that's the ending you want. Meghan took a deep breath, composing herself. You've given me a lot to think about, Whoopi. I don't know if I agree with everything you've said, but I appreciate your honesty. That's all anyone can ask for, Whoopi replied. Honesty. And maybe that's something for both of us to sit with. The tension in the studio finally began to ease as the producers signaled for a commercial break. Meghan and Whoopi shook hands, though the warmth that had been there at the beginning of the interview was noticeably absent. This wasn't the feel-good moment The View had been hoping for, but it was real, raw, and undeniably compelling television. As the show wrapped up and Meghan left the stage, you could see her speaking intensely with her team, clearly processing everything that had just happened. Whoopi, for her part, sat back in her chair with an unreadable expression, perhaps wondering if she'd gone too far, or perhaps satisfied that she'd said what needed to be said. What do you think about this clash? Did Whoopi cross a line, or was she just saying what everyone else was thinking? Drop your comments below and make sure you subscribe, because conversations like this are exactly what we're here for. Who do you think won this exchange, Meghan or Whoopi?